It's interesting when you start thinking about one of the things that moves us and drives us as an organization. It is that we're dissatisfied. We're dissatisfied with the percentage of kids who grow up in our church and walk away and drop out of faith and drop out of Christianity. And we feel like we can't keep doing business as usual. We can't just ignore the fact that we have to fundamentally look at a lot of the systems and a lot of the programs and a lot of the curriculums and a lot of what we're doing. We've got to ask hard questions about what we need to do in the context of that to create a different kind of experience so kids walk away with a mobilized faith. It doesn't really matter which expert you talk to. If you talk to Fuller will say 50% of kids drop out of faith and walk away from Christianity when they go off to college. Lifeway, will tell you 60% or so drop out of faith. Barna will say 70%. And you say, who's right? Whose stat is really more accurate? I don't know, and I really don't care. When it comes right down to it, there's about 50, at least percent, that we lose by simply kids walking away and being disillusioned. And last year, we spent the entire day talking about the dials that we need to turn and the insights that we need to somehow put back in place so that they don't walk away. But the thing that concerns me even more than all of that is not the percentage of kids who walk away and drop out of faith. It's the percentage of kids, again, that never show up because they're growing up in culture outside the church. So as we recreate the model to keep the percentage of the 25% that are coming engaged with faith, we also have to think in terms about what kind of systems are we creating to build a different kind of ministry and to create a different kind of experience to reach the kids who are surrounding your church and surrounding your community and not going to church. But the thing that I think is important to think in terms of is that some of you in this room have realized that you're called to build relationships with the next generation on the front lines. And you've bought into this idea, this notion, that it's not about the program, it's not about the attendance, it's not how many people show up to something, it's how are you organizing your ministry in such a way so that the relationships go down deep and so that you have people connected with caring adults. We've been working with a kid for the last couple of years. As a matter of fact, a year ago, this next week, she tried to take her own life in New York. She's a girl that we've been working with. She comes out of a sex trafficking environment, and for us, it's been a traumatic journey because, if you've ever worked with someone who's really been broken by a lot of awful things in their life, it's just sometimes it's difficult to figure out if you're helping, if you're hurting, what really works. And this last summer at Big Stuff Camps, I'd gotten off a phone call with her talking through some stuff that she was struggling with and dealing with. And I remember going to bed that night, and I just couldn't sleep. And I wrote this down because I just wanted to remind myself. I just wanted to remind myself why this is important. And I don't know if this will make sense to you, but this, at the core of why we show up to lean into you and to work with you and to talk with you at Leaders is this idea. And this is what I wrote down that night. I'm absolutely convinced that if every teenager had a place to belong and someone to believe in them, it could radically affect their faith and their future. I can't do that for every teenager. I can't even do it for very many. But I can do it for a few. Isn't there something fundamentally that says to you, this isn't about us having a better presentation, us having a better ability to communicate. At the core of this, there is a relationship that has to take place between a leader and a kid, or a leader and a teenager, and that relationship holds within it the key to the future and the faith of that kid, not simply because we know the right answers, but because we understand that God wired us for relationships to do life together. We decided to do something really unusual about 8 or 9 months ago. We decided that the role the small group leader plays in the average church is so important and so significant that we were going to spend our time and spend our energy organizing ideas around what that would look like and what that means and what that would be, to such a degree that we decided several months ago, before we hit Orange Conference, before we hit tour, we wanted to take some time to talk to you about why it's important to recruit leaders who understand that it's not about doing ministry to the multitude of the masses, but it's about doing ministry to a handful of people if we're going to change the stat that we feel like exists and indicates that so many are walking away and dropping out of faith. And it fundamentally, comes down to this one issue. And I hope you'll understand and agree with this, that what you do for a few will always have more impact than what you do for many. Somewhere along the way, we have created a role that she represents. Tell me your name. Gail. That Gail represents the role of small group leader. I mean, sometimes we use the word teacher, sometimes we use the word leader, but in our world we use the word small group leader. That means that she has decided to invest in a few people over time, and that we have this core responsibility in our church to recruit people to do life with kids and teenagers. And we would say that's different than having a class. We would say that's different than teaching a lesson. We would even say that one of the fundamental struggles has been over the last few years, we don't really know how to define this and clarify what this is sometimes when we're recruiting people to do it. But we know it's a critical part of discipleship. I even think it's important for a small group leader to know what they don't do before you can even start talking about what they do. Because what Gail has done is not simply be a parent. It's not really that. It's not even being a coach or a teacher. It's more than that. It's not a counselor. It's kind of bits and pieces of all those things. And yet at the same time, not any of those things. And if I were to define this for you in a way where we could talk about it with all of our churches and all of our leaders and everywhere, I would say this about a small group leader. A small group leader is simply someone who's made a choice to invest strategically in the lives of a few over time so you can help build an authentic faith. To do something for a few, don't miss this, that you can't do for many. There's an irreducible minimum that you have to understand and recognize that you're able to accomplish certain things with, that if you get beyond that, if it gets to a certain size, if it gets too many, you can't accomplish the same kind of thing you can with a few. So in your church and in my church, in our organizations, if we're effective and if we're strategic, what we're going to do is we're going to reorganize all the time to reduce it down to the few that we can do ministry with and disciple with effectively. Because if we let it get too big, if we let it grow too large in the context of relationships, it limits our potential to build authentic faith. So we have to be intentional about leaning in to the Gails of the world and other leaders and saying, we want to give you a few that you can be the custodian of for a period of years, to invest in them strategically. Why? Not just to make them better people, to help them have a better future. No, to hand them off a faith in a way that you couldn't hand them off the same way if there were a lot of people. Again, the reason this is so important is because it means if you really believe this, and this is a critical part of making sure that the next generation doesn't just walk away, it means we've got to take a hard look sometimes at how we're organizing our churches and how we, do ministry. We've got to recognize that as important as the platform and as important as the big room and as important as the presentations and as important as all those things are, that those things should be steps to leading people in the context of relationships if we want faith to go deeper.